And a warm welcome too. My name is Austin Mitchell. I'm the chair of the Labour Euro Safeguards organisation, which is a massive organisation fighting to hold back the tide of Europe and give safeguards to this country, which is now concerned, as we all must be, with the new so-called constitutional treaty. As the chairman of the meeting, they only allowed me to speak for half an hour, so I'll just kick it off and introducing our speakers. But the big issue is this constitution. I was glad to see that Gordon didn't, in his speech today, close the door on a referendum, because there has to be a referendum on this constitution. We promised the people in 2005 in our manifesto that there would be a referendum on the constitution. That constitution has now, because it was rejected by the French and the Dutch, wisely rejected by the French and the Dutch, so we never had the chance in this country, been transmogrified into a constitutional treaty. But the important point of that constitutional treaty is that all the basic points of the constitution, all the basic steps of turning Europe into a unitary state with powers over the component states, are still there in the Constitution. I don't know whether we've lost sight of that in translation, but when Angela Merkel says it's essentially the same and it's basically what they wanted, when Bertie Ahern says it's the same and it's what they wanted, when the Prime Minister of mighty Luxembourg, who's a major influence on Europe, says it's essentially the same and what they wanted, I begin to believe it's pretty much the same. Only in this country are we told, oh no, it's nothing really, major changes, several important points left out, and this is a much better deal just to make Europe, nothing constitutional really, just to make Europe work more efficiently. Well, if it can work without this document, it can work equally, it can continue to work in the same way after the constitution has been rejected. It is the same constitution. Apart from a few trimmings, like, for instance, they've dropped the idea of a national anthem, which I think is rather sad, actually, because I quite like Beethoven's Ninth, and it was the national anthem of other corrupt regimes, namely independent Rhodesia, so it might as well be the national anthem for Europe. So it saddens me, the idea of a flag from public buildings, all that kind of stuff, has been dropped, but the guts of it are there. The guts of building a nation state with its own army, its own foreign policy, its own president. It is locking us in to the European, well, I'd say prison, but it's locking us into the European architecture in a way we've not been locked before. I can see why opponents don't want a referendum, because Europe is very much a construct of the European elite who foisted it step by step on the people. It's the biggest machine of distortion, inaccuracy there's ever been in politics. It discredits politics. But this has been foisted on us step by step. They now say, well, this does less than the Maastricht Treaty. It does less than the Single European Act, and we didn't have referenda on them. So step by step, we're invited to surrender our powers without being consulted. Invited to condone this erosion of British sovereignty. Well, I continue to believe that the nation state is the only way we've found to improve the lot of the people and to give them democratic control over what's being done in their name. That's all a construct of the nation state, not some amorphous mass in Europe over which we don't have democratic control, which ambles its way as a series of compromises and fiddles and negotiations in which we are only one influence. What Europe can do for us, we can do for ourselves, and better, and should. So don't let's think, we're getting good things from Europe. We're not. We're getting a continuous process of erosion in the basic role of the nation state, which has taken us this far and will take us further yet. So there has to be a referendum. The opponents don't want a referendum. I know why they don't want a referendum, because they think they'll lose. But that in itself is an admission that they are foisting the constitution on the people. These are the rights of the people, the sovereignty of the people. We cannot give them away to anything. Treaty, negotiation, any of these complex deals that Europe goes in for without consulting them. Gordon Brown, I know, is a leader who wants the party to listen to the people. I'm sure at the end of the day he will concede what we're demanding, a referendum. Give us a referendum. And it's not true, by the way, that I posed for this picture on the front page of The Sun. It is in fact Tony Hancock as far as I can see, but I think The Sun had got it right. If we don't give them a referendum, it's to you, and if we do give them a referendum, it's thumbs up to the people. Right, I'll introduce our first speaker, who is Tony Benn. Tony, a great stalwart in our cause. Spoke for us on many platforms. Welcome back to our platform. Here's the microphone.
Right, thanks a lot. It's a very big issue, this, whatever view you take of it. It is a very, very big decision. And I'm very glad Keith Vaz, who's in favour of it, has come out in favour of the European enterprise, has come out in favour of this. And this idea that you're only in favour of democracy if you think you're going to win the argument is completely irrelevant. Now, can I just look back on my thoughts about this to explain the position that I'm in? I was born after the First World War, Second World War, the combination 105 million people died. And there are people who say we can never fight again in Europe, and I agree with them 100%. I do not want the old nationalist Europe where you hate foreigners. So that's the argument for cooperation, and I take that view. I'm strongly in favour of cooperating with Europe. I was for a time, I campaigned for the referendum. If you know this, I was in a minority of one on the National Executive and the Shadow Cabinet. In 71, they didn't want a referendum, but in the end we got a referendum after we'd gone in and we lost it, and then I was on the Council of Ministers. And that was the most shattering experience I've ever been in my life, because I was the representative of Britain, and for 6 months I was the president of the Council of Energy Ministers. I wasn't allowed to submit a document. Only the Commission, who are bureaucrats, could submit a document. I could say yes or no, sort of a constitutional monarch, if you like. They controlled it. It met in secret. It made laws for Britain and everywhere else. It met in secret. And when I suggested we met in public, they nearly strangled me, because all their dirty little deals would have come out. And so the more I thought about this, and this is what it's about now, it is about democracy. And remember this, I was a member for 51 years. Members of Parliament are lent the powers of their constituents, and they have to return those powers undiminished at the end. It's not for members of Parliament to give away the powers that were lent to them, because they don't belong to members of Parliament, they belong to the electorate. And that is a critical matter. And now I say something else. I mean, we're primarily concerned with Britain, but it terrifies me that Germany didn't allow its own people to have a referendum on whether Germany should enter the European Union and have the treaty. And you know, before the war, Hitler wasn't exactly a democrat, and that practice of everything being decided at the top has been carried on to that. France had a referendum, defeated it, and now Sarkozy is trying to bypass it. And we live in a continent where increasingly power has gone to a group of people who are not elected, cannot be removed, and don't have to listen to us. I mean, Mandelson's a very powerful man. He wasn't even elected by the House of Commons. Blair appointed him under the royal prerogative. And Mandelson doesn't have to listen to us. With all the defects of our democracy, the reason governments listen to people is because you get your power from the people. I mean, being an MP, you know this, we're in a very unusual position. You're one employee and 60,000 employers. Everyone in your constituency employs you. The bus driver, the street sweeper, the home help, the policeman, they employ you. You can say what you like and always have done, but they can get rid of you. Because they can get rid of you, you have to listen to them. Mandelson doesn't have to listen to anybody. And it is the most bureaucratic, terrifying system in the world. And it's being imposed on us on the grounds it's tidying up. I must say, if tidying up involves tearing up the British Constitution, well, that's an interesting definition of tidying up. And I think this argument is an overwhelming argument. Now, there are other views of Europe. As I say, I don't want to go back to the old nationalism because of the bloodshed that took place. You could have a United States of Europe. You could have a president and a Congress and a House of Representatives. I mean, it would be wholly unwieldy, but you couldn't complain about it. After all, America isn't governed by a commission. Would you want this country governed by a commission? You could apply the European Constitution to Britain, and you'd find they were commissioners. And we don't even elect European members of Parliament. Do you realise that? You vote for the party. I can't write to an MEP and say, I won't vote for you again. To write back and say, Tony, you never voted for me in the first place. You voted for the party. And Blair decides who is the candidate. So the thing is absolutely undemocratic. And the effect of it, of course, is to create a lot of hostility to it, which means it won't work anyway. I tell you one thing, even if I believed in it, I think this system will end up with the breakup of the European Union like Yugoslavia. And I do not want that to happen either. I do not want to find we go back to hostility based on blaming the French or blaming the Italians or the Germans, because what's wrong is the system is wrong. And that is what we have to prevent. Now, how do you win the argument? Well, I mean, I listened to all this stuff this week about we've got to participate more. The manifesto is going to be put out to a referendum. Well, manifestos only last for a couple of years. But this decision is far more important than the next Labour manifesto, because it decides who governs, by what system. And there was an overwhelming argument, and the Austins put absolutely right. Of course, the reason they don't want it, they wouldn't carry the day. You couldn't carry the day. And so this is the argument. Now, I'm not a great moderniser, if that means privatisation and all the rest of it, but I must say perhaps we should come up with the idea of modernising the European Union, by which I mean restoring power to the member states to cooperate. I'm not a nationalist. I mean, I don't know about you, I'm not in favour of a Scottish Parliament. If you are. Well, if there's a Scottish Parliament, they'll love it in Brussels because they'll be easier to control. If there's a Scottish Parliament, my mother was a Scot, I'm going to Scotland, I'm going to lead a campaign for the independence of the Kingdom of Fife against Edinburgh. I don't think nationalism is the answer to lack of democracy. The answer to lack of democracy is more democracy. And you know what, I'm perfectly honest with you, if this all goes through, Gordon Brown won't be the Prime Minister of Britain, he'll be the Mayor of the Greater British Authority, like Ken Livingstone. Well, it is. I mean, he won't have the power to do what he wants to do because those decisions will be taken elsewhere. And so it's the destruction of our domestic democracy as well as a European arrangement that is undemocratic that really worries me very, very much indeed. And I think we've got to think this out very, very carefully. But if we put a serious argument, everybody wants to cooperate with Europe. Of course they do. But cooperation on the basis that you put up proposals for harmonisation and the nation states decide which of those proposals they will adhere to. It'll be slower, it'll be more difficult, but by God, in the end, you'll be sure that every single harmonisation law has been consented to by the Parliament and can be repealed by succeeding Parliament. Now, one last point. I think what we're seeing in Europe is the beginning of a much, much bigger and more dangerous trend, the death of democracy generally. Leave aside for a moment Brussels. The IMF is not elected by anybody. World Trade Organization not elected anybody. Multinational corporations are more powerful than nation states. They're not elected by anybody. The central bank in Frankfurt's not elected by anybody. And funnily enough, one of the most successful countries in the world is Norway. Norway, why they're successful? I tell you why. They nationalised their oil. When I was Energy Minister, I managed to get hold of 20% of the North Sea oil, which Thatcher sold off. But Norway got the lot. And I was talking to a Swiss general the other day. I don't normally talk to generals, but he happened to come and have a chat to me. And they have the referendum as the basis of the principle. And they said, we're never going to go into the European Union. And you see, we don't have to go this way. This idea there's no alternative, as Mrs. Thatcher's phrase is, it's completely untrue. We have a choice. It's an important choice. And we're making a democratic argument that should appeal to people of all opinions, not just political opinions, but even those in favour of the new treaty should have the guts to say, not only am I in favour of it, but I'm in favour of it being introduced by the consent of the British people. So I think the challenge to democracy is a big one. We've seen a bit of it at this conference. Very interesting conference, this. No resolutions and no bookshop. You can't hear anybody's ideas. The only book you can read, by the way, is Alistair Campbell's book. It's being sold at the party headquarters. Funnily enough, when it was Alistair Campbell's book came out, I thought there'd be a Harry Potter queue outside the bookshop, so I got there early in case they all sold out. Nobody there, and I said to the girl, "Have you got the Blair years?" And she said, "How do you spell Blair?" And that somehow said it all. Comrades, we've got a very important argument. Just like the Chartists and the suffragettes, we're about democracy. And democracy will be fatally damaged in Britain and in Europe if we go along with a system that has no firm democratic base. All I've got to say, I've tried not to be controversial at 82, you know, I tried just to put simple arguments, but I fully support the Safeguards Committee, and John's reports are brilliant. I don't know if you collect them, but I've kept everyone he's ever written. I'm going to publish the collected works of John Mills one day, because it sets the whole case out so clearly. And Austin's Championship and others. Peter Shaw would have been on the platform if he'd been here today. So thank you for asking me. I'm sorry I've got 4 more fringes, but when you've retired, everyone rings you up and says, "Will you do a meeting?" They seem to think you've got nothing to do. So I'm going to slip off to them, but thank you for asking me. And I think we have a good chance of winning this, because the public are with us, and you can't defy the public forever on really big issues. Thank you for listening.
Thanks very much, Tony. We're sorry you've got to go, but as usual, a great speech. Now, as you go, I'm going to ask John Mills to take a collection from the audience. While we've got you here as prisoners, the doors will be slammed, so you can't leave. But we are an organisation which doesn't have large sums of money from Europe and all the help that the government provides in putting over European propaganda. We've got to raise our own money to fight our own campaigns. It's difficult and it's expensive, and we're particularly concerned to keep our bulletin going. This is actually a cod of the bulletin. Here's our bulletin, Labour European Safeguards, and we were flattered today that Labour Movement for Europe gave us a cod. Well, imitation is a sincerest form of flattery, so they're flattering us, but we need money to keep being flattered. John.
Well, thank you very much for that, Chairman. One of the things about Austin Mitchell is that he always takes his time to introduce everybody and say a few words for half an hour or so before he actually gets on to introducing the next speaker. And so I hope you'll excuse me if I just say a few words before dealing with the whole question of the collection. And I'd just like to just add some remarks to what Tony Benn said to you now about this whole issue of the Constitution. I think some of you here may receive the bulletins that we produce regularly every couple of months, and the last 3 of these have all been about this issue, so there's been quite a lot of rehearsal of the arguments within the Labour movement, but I think it's still worth just reiterating them and pulling them together just to make sure that we all understand exactly what they are. And I think there are 4 different reasons why we ought to have a referendum. The first is we were promised one. And we weren't promised one just by the Labour Party. We were promised one by every person who was elected for any of the major political parties at the last general election. I think there are about 6 people elected to the House of Commons who were not covered by that promise. That was all Labour Party, all Conservative and all Lib Dem members of Parliament were elected on the footing that the Constitution came forward, then there would be a referendum as to whether they should be accepted or not. Now, there is an argument that's put forward that what we've now got in front of us isn't the old Constitution. But I have to say that those who have analysed it all reckon that about 240 of the 250 proposals in the original Constitution are still there in the 2 treaties. There's 2 bits of these treaties that link together to produce the new framework, which is now, we're told, going to be implemented by Parliament and not by a referendum of the people, as was promised. We're told also that actually we're all safe anyway, because even if there are these proposals, there are opt-outs of various sorts which are going to secure the position. You remember the famous 4 proposals that were put forward by the government, which they said were their red line proposals. But there are 2 points about those. One is that these proposals in various forms were all in the original constitutional document that was there 2 years ago. There's no really significant changes between what the opt-outs and special arrangements for Britain were then and what they are now. But even the opt-outs that we've got are very vulnerable indeed to the European Court of Justice, which is very much biased towards a federal view of Europe, which would almost certainly overturn them. So there's not a great deal of safety there. And I have to say, when you see politicians on the TV or hear them on the radio, I don't know whether you saw Gordon Brown on the, I think it's Breakfast TV or something, one of the programs I was watching, I was getting up this morning, trying to justify not having a referendum by claiming that the new proposals are completely different from the old ones. It was really hard to believe that he really believed what he was saying. And indeed, if you look at what the leaders in Europe are saying all over the place, from Germany to Portugal to Ireland, as I think Austin, you said earlier on, all of them openly admit that what we've got now is just a rehash of the Constitution with no major changes at all. So that's one reason why we ought to have a referendum. The second is one which Tony Benn alluded to, and that is that Parliament has no right to give away its powers, and especially without the consent of the electorate. MPs are elected for a limited period of time to fulfil their manifesto commitments, and then they hand back to Parliament or to the people the powers they had before. Parliament has never been able to bind its successors. And I have to say, the argument that the constitutional treaty or the reform treaty we're now looking at doesn't transfer any significant powers to Brussels from Westminster at all simply doesn't stand up. If you look at it, there are loads and loads of changes that have been made. The problem we've always had with these sort of changes, with Nice and Maastricht and all the rest of it, is that it's all incremental. It's all bits here and bits there, and it's when you add the whole lot up together that you realise what a massive change is involved. But this is at least as big a change as the earlier ones that we've had, and to have a change like that taking place, the capstone of all the other ones, without the consent of the people, can't be right. The third reason why we need a referendum is if you look at the opinion polls. It is absolutely crystal clear that what is proposed in the Reform Treaty, what's involved in the Constitution, is not what most people in Britain want. There are loads of polls that have been done which show only too clearly what people in Britain, the vast majority of them, do want. It's not that they're against Europe. They certainly do not want to cut Britain off from the rest of the continent of Europe. They all feel a part of it. They like European culture, they like travelling there, they like being able to go and work there, they like having friends there, they like free trade, they like being heavily involved. They're more than happy to cooperate with other people in Europe in every single way that makes sense. What they don't want to do is to give up their nationality, they don't want to give up their powers of self-government, and they don't want to be ruled by people who they can't remove, who are unelected by anybody in Brussels. So the idea that we should have this constitution pushed through against an enormous tide of opposition to it. And I have to say that although the Sun has run some campaigns over the years, I don't know whether you saw the Sun this morning, there is page after page after page of really trenchant argument about the Constitution. And if this sort of thing goes on, I think that the extent to which, to some extent, people in Britain don't really care about the EU, they think it's all a bit beyond their capacity to control. I would have thought there was a very reasonable chance over the next few months that you're going to see an enormous focus of interest on the EU issue, and therefore a much greater degree of opposition than would otherwise have materialised. But finally, I think the reason for having a referendum is that actually having a referendum really would provide us, for the first time for more than a quarter of a century, with an opportunity to redefine exactly where we are going in relations with the other countries in Europe. And I think this is what would happen. If there was a referendum here, I think it is very likely that there would be, from the government's perspective, a no vote. Now, if that happened, there would have to be renegotiation. First of all, it would probably trigger off referendums in other countries in Europe, but at the very least there would have to be a reassessment about whether the Constitution was going to go ahead, and this would allow a very substantial amount of scope for Britain to renegotiate what our arrangements would be with the rest of Europe. And it may very well be that the outcome would be that other countries in Europe wanted to go ahead and create their sort of unified state of Europe and to have high degrees of integration. And quite honestly, if that's what they want to do, I don't think we're in any position to stop them. What I don't think we want is to necessarily be a part of that if we don't want to be in that particular situation. And I think the reality is not only that most people in this country don't want to be there, but I don't think most MPs are. I think we're in a very dangerous situation where MPs and all the major political parties are being dragooned into supporting something which in the end most of them are only very reluctantly doing because they don't really believe in what they're being asked to do. And I think that is when you get to a situation where none of the political parties in this country really articulate and represent what most people in the country think on such a vital issue as this, then we really are in not very good shape. So this is why this whole issue is such a very important one. Now, if I could just say a little bit about the Labour Euro Safeguards campaign, we've been going for a long period of time. We started immediately after the referendum in 1975, so we've been at it for 32 years, and over that period of time we've had ups and downs. At one stage we were the flavour of the month in the Labour Party, and then we certainly weren't for quite a long period of time, and then there was an extraordinary reversal where you may recall that in 1975 and thereafter for the next few years it was the Tory party that was very much in favour of the EU, and the Labour Party was much more sceptical. Then it all swung round the other way. But we've been here through all these comings and goings, and we've had meetings every year to put forward our point of view. And I have to say, for the last couple of years, it's been quite tough because it looked as if the Constitution had been killed off by the votes in France and Holland, and the Euro, which was a major issue which we were concerned with. Again, that was one which I think we played a part in contributing to the fact that the Euro didn't go ahead as far as Britain was concerned. So we didn't really have any very major issues to fight. But now suddenly the Constitution has come back, and there is a really very major issue in front of the British people where what we can do to influence the Labour movement. We are affiliated to the Labour Party. In that sense, we're part of the Labour Party. We do have a really important role to play. And the main way we do this is by producing bulletins, which we distribute every couple of months. We have a mailing list of just under 10,000 people. A lot of them are trade union activists, they're constituency Labour Party, they're Labour Party activists, and this does seem to be a fairly effective way of influencing opinion, particularly if we have the opposition copying what we do with this thing here, which I think is rather flattering to us. But all this lot does cost a substantial amount of money to keep going. Every issue of the bulletin that we produce costs us about £5,000 to print and distribute. I'm sorry to say that none of us get paid anything for doing all this. In fact, it costs us money getting all this activity done, and therefore what we do try to do is to have all the events which we organise, like this meeting here this afternoon, paying for themselves. And so what I would like to do is to ask you to contribute to the cost of the meeting here by making a contribution. And Charles, our treasurer, is at the back there, I think with some plates. But before we get round to plates and change, I wonder if we could ask you to provide us with some notes or cheques to get us started. So what about £20? Anybody prepared to cop up £20 towards the cost of the meeting?
If you'll take a co-op cheque.
Yeah.
Do we use cheques?
We'll take anything, any form of money. We'll take euros, actually. No. Well, all in a good cause. Anybody prepared to cop? Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you very much, Kevin. That's really, really helpful. Anybody else? In the row, front row there, Charles. There we go. That's wonderful. Anybody else for £20? Yeah, another one at the back there. Thank you very much indeed. That's really, really helpful. £20 at the back. All right, let's move on to £10. Now, you really must be able to afford £10. Really, really, really important that we keep going. So if we can just look in your wallet and see if you can find £10 there. Check, another check coming up here. Thank you very much, Austin. A few £10. Oh, come on. Must be worth £10. There we go. There's one there. Thank you very much indeed. Another one in the front. Thank you very much.
No.
Really, really appreciated. Anybody else for £10? Go on, we're getting there slowly. Right, in that case, if you can empty your pockets of any change you've got and put them in the plates, we'll be passing round really quickly, and then we'll be moving on to Calvin Hopkins. So there we go. Being just past, perhaps, Charles, I think we've got 2 plates there. We can pass one round on the left-hand side of the meeting and the other on the right. Then we'll get the collection done as quick as possible, so we don't take up too long. We'll let you know how much the collection is at the end of the meeting. See whether we can cover the costs. There we go. Thank you very much indeed. All donations, very, very much appreciated. There we go. Thank you very much indeed. The room hire, actually the room hire here was fairly reasonable. Wasn't too expensive, but we had arranged some cups of tea for those of you who arrived early, and I think we've got some drinks coming up for those of you who want to stay on just for a little bit afterwards. So you get something back for your money, and if you can just make sure you contribute as quick as possible, then we'll move on to the next speaker. Okay? Right, I think we're just finishing off the back there. Well, thank you very much indeed for your contributions. Hugely appreciate, and I'll pass you back to the chair.
Well, thank you very much. It's good to, keep the clinking of money going while we speak. We don't mind that, as long as the continuous clink, clink, clink will know its support. I'm going to introduce our next speaker, and he's my friend Calvin Hopkins. I think Calvin has found the immutable law of the new Labour Party that to be anti-European or Eurosceptic is not exactly career enhancing. It's one of the burdens we all have to face. But Calvin has been staunch throughout, and one of our strongest supporters, and indeed making the intellectual case against Europe very powerfully and very effective. So welcome, please, Calvin Hopkins.
Thank you, Austin, and good evening, everyone. I just actually misinformed someone. I said early on to this afternoon that would they come to this meeting, and they said, well, there was the free drinks and free food. I said, no, but there's a collection. And they decided to come. But it's actually because all the meetings I speak at, they're always the same. You know, William Hague apparently made almost £1 million from speaking engagements in 1 year. Well, I've spoken at 1,000 meetings. I've never been paid for any of them, and I've usually had to pay my own bus fare and contribute to the hire of the room. But that's the sort of meetings we go to. We don't get that much in the way of corporate sponsorship on the left, I'm afraid. There we are. But it's always a pleasure to speak on this platform, and I've been a supporter of LESC for decades indeed, from long before I was in Parliament, and I speak frequently in Parliament on the same issues as well. It's always a particular pleasure to speak after Tony Benn, because Tony is a good friend, but is also a strong supporter, and I was very complimented and flattered when he insisted on coming to speak for me in my election campaign in 2005. We had a big public meeting, and it was absolutely superbly attended, a really wonderful occasion. And as a result, I think, I have now got the biggest Labour majority in the eastern region of England, which wasn't the case before. So I think it's partly due to Tony that he's still, can pull the votes in, and I'm delighted that he was supporting me. But I've come here to talk about the issues before us, and the drive to create a single European state, which is what this is really all about. It's been pretty blatant since, I think, the mid-1980s that that's the direction of travel. Before that, it was rather stuck in the doldrums, the EU, and although we were critical of it and we didn't agree with it, it actually only really took off in the mid-1980s. And anybody who tries to pretend that it's not about creating a superstate, I think, is either deluded or they're being dishonest. And I think there's a bit of both in some cases. I use a phrase when I'm speaking in the House of Commons, and I say I'm, a very strong supporter of Europe in the genuine sense. But I use a phrase, I say I'm looking for a Europe which is an association of independent democratic countries cooperating voluntarily for mutual benefit in the interests of the wider world. And it's a phrase I've used many times, and a lot of ministers come around and say, well, we agree with that. I say, well, that's not what the European Union is about. And one must separate the concept of the European Union and Europe. It is an imposition, a construct imposed upon Europe. And like Tony and like many people, I'm a great lover of Europe. I mean, Europe is my home. I'm culturally European. I love the music. I love the people. I love the ideas of European socialists. This is what I am. I'm a European. I confess, I know I'm surrounded by teetotalers here. I even enjoy very much indeed European wine, and as I hope other people do as well. So everything about Europe I love, except the imposition of the European Union upon Europe. We ought to have a different arrangement for the peaceful world that we all want within Europe and across the world. But ministers keep claiming that what they're supporting is what I say, and it's not true. We know that very well. Some of them are genuinely Eurosceptic. I think even Gordon Brown. I think it's the case actually, John, that Gordon used to be a member of the ESC. Well, he was a member of ESC. You know,
from our platform.
Well, there we are. 22, 23 years ago, he was a member. I hope he will come back one day and speak again on the same issues. But there are many people in government at the highest level who are slightly Eurosceptic. After it was Gordon Brown who stopped us going into the euro, effectively. When Blair was trying to push us in, it was Gordon Brown who stopped us, and I think that was a very sensible thing to do. We've also had suggestions in recent days that Jack Straw is still peddling his Euroscepticism. I've even heard it said that the current Minister for Europe is not that keen, but they get given this short straw and they have to defend something they don't really believe in or are not that keen on. And it's interesting, when we have our debates in the House of Commons on the European issues, I mean, Austin and I frequently speak, and in fact I've spoken on, I think, all but one occasion in the last 10 years. People are sick of hearing me. I've tried to think of new words every time, new ideas, to tell a different joke, a different story, because otherwise it becomes too repetitive. I may say that on one occasion I was complimented, I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing, but Portillo said to me after one of these speeches, he said, "Good speech," he said, "good speech." Well, that was all right, because in a sense, the Tories who we disagree with philosophically want also to retain a degree of democracy in Britain. They want to choose, and I've said in the Commons, I said what we want is for the British people to retain the right to choose a Conservative government or a Democratic Socialist Labour government. We do not want governments to become irrelevant. Because all power is held by Brussels, and that's what we're driving towards. And so that is why we are, I think, taking a strong view that we should reject, not just have a referendum, but reject the Reform Treaty as well. And any suggestion that the Reform Treaty is different from the Constitutional Treaty, I think it is complete nonsense. I've got an interesting bit of briefing here. And it's got two columns. It's got the columns where it's all the same, and it's got the columns where there's changes. Now, if you look, some of you can see this. It's got a little bit which is different. That's the change, and then the rest of it's blank left column all the way through. And so the bits that are the same on the right-hand column. So, and the bits that are changed they're taking the symbols, the Beethoven's Ninth and all that. But they're also changing, very, very significant changes. The name Union Minister for Foreign Affairs, in other words, European Foreign Minister, it's been replaced by High Representative of the Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy. So obviously it's a fundamental change, that is, isn't it? And one suspects that if he or she is ever appointed, their job will be no different than it was in the Constitutional Treaty. And of course we've had Giscard d'Estaing and many others boasting that they've got what they want. Well, they haven't yet, because we haven't actually had our referendum, and they should wait until we have. If you go back to the first attempt to impose the Constitutional Treaty, it was Spain and Poland that kicked it out, and the relief in Downing Street was almost tangible. Almost you could hear. I was thinking, oh, thank God for that. They've kicked it out. We won't come back. But of course, the Euro fanatics imposed it again, and it came back a second time. And then they had the French referendum. Now, the French political parties, the major ones in government, all were pro the Constitution. The French socialists went to the extreme of having a referendum in their party about it, and they still managed to get a majority. But when it was put to the mass of the people, they voted no, and very sensibly too. And it was the left and the trade unionists who secured that vote. I mean, no doubt there were some on the right as well, but it was people on the left and trade unionists and working people that voted no. And then we went off to Holland for a referendum. And they had another referendum there. And again, the whole establishment was saying vote one way. And some people on the left, some trade unionists, said vote no. And there was a big no vote. Significantly, the turnout in the referendum in Holland was 20% larger than the turnout for the European elections. So they care a lot more about, having a constitution foisted on them they don't want than they do about the European elections. I mean, they're getting enthusiasm for our system of PR, I think, is becoming more and more difficult. I mean, the turnout in European elections has always been bad, but it's getting worse. So that's the reality. The European Union is a construct. It's an elite conspiracy, I call it, to remove democratic power from the countries of Europe and from their peoples. And I think people are increasingly becoming aware of that. They are not democratising the institutions of Europe, the European Union. I mean, the Commission is not democratic. I mean, they can be kicked out by the European Parliament en masse, en bloc, but that's the sort of nuclear seismic option, if you like, and they have on occasion done that once, but it doesn't really matter very much. They just reassemble with perhaps one or two changes and come back and do the same as they did before. You can't actually democratically change what they're doing. And of course, there's another institution called the European Council, where prime ministers go and they get into this secret room with no officials there, and none of their own officials, and they talk. And they come out of the room, and then a statement is issued, drawn up by officials, European officials, and then there's no minutes, no recording. So if you go into this meeting, you sit there and you talk for a few hours about whatever it might be, privatising the railways or something. You come out, apparently an agreement's been made, then a statement is issued, and you can say, well, I don't remember that, I don't remember agreeing to that, but of course there's no minutes, so you can't check or confirm that it's actually what they said. But it's that's the way they operate, and they are determined to make sure that the bureaucrats and the people who are controlling what's happening in Europe get their way, even when you have prime ministers. But another referendum we should mention, of course, is the Swedish referendum. Again, the establishment tried to force through the Swedish referendum in favour of joining the euro, and again it was the trade unionists and the left who feared for their welfare state, for their workers' rights, that they would be undermined, and so they've strongly Eurosceptic as well. They've given up in Norway on trying to persuade the Norwegians to vote in favour of joining the European Union. So clearly there is a disjuncture between the peoples of Europe and what people, when they're asked what they really want, and what their leaders, what the diplomats and the bureaucrats and the prime ministers say people want. And I think that's something fairly profoundly wrong, and it's one of the reasons why we're campaigning so strongly to persuade our government to let us have a referendum. I suspect, actually, even in the Parliamentary Labour Party, most people are fairly, I think docile is a polite word, when it comes to challenging the leadership. And when we have our debates, it's quite fascinating because we have fairly trenchant people on our side, like Austin and myself and Ian Davidson and a few others, and we always go and make our point. And sometimes the pro-Euro forces are so feeble, they almost give up. I mean, Chris Bryant, the last time, he said, "Are you going to speak again?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Oh, I'm not going to bother," and he walked out. And he's one of the key Euro enthusiasts. We always have Keith Vaz, who comes along and does a few minutes, but by and large, we win the argument on our side. And the strange thing is that the Tories, when they have their speakers, most of the Tories are against, but they don't bother to speak. They come and say a few words, but they always have their minority of Euro enthusiasts who come along. One of them has just joined us, of course, Quentin Davis. One of the reasons he joined the Labour Party, he's a multi-millionaire toff owns half of Yorkshire or something, but he's definitely hardcore socialist, I'm told. But Quentin Davis has joined us, and mustn't speak ill of a fellow member, but he's joined us because basically he's a Euro fanatic, and he thinks that the Labour leadership will fight the Euro cause or the EU cause. I think he's going to be a bit disappointed because it's not that enthusiastic. But if you actually scratch the surface and had a secret ballot amongst Labour MPs, which was genuinely secret, where they would never be fearful of being found out, are you a supporter of the European integration, or are you not? There might even be a majority against. MPs are very fearful of disagreeing with the leadership because it doesn't do their career prospects any good. I mean, I'm waiting for Tony Benn to come back as Prime Minister, and then I'll might ask for a job, But I suspect that may not happen, much as Tony is still very, very popular. But the debate inside the Labour Party, I think, is important to retain because so many people don't actually say very much, and I suspect they really agree with us. The number of people who are really hostile to us in the Parliamentary Labour Party is tiny. there's about 3 or 4 people who come along and say pro-Euro things. But the great majority say nothing and don't turn up, and so we have, in a sense, the field to ourselves quite frequently, and it's quite good. I mean, there's no time limit on speeches because there's so few people want to speak. Astonishing. But I'm always there, and Austin's always there, and Ian Davidson's always there, and we always have our say, and a few others too. I think the reality is that we win the argument, and that's what this meeting is about, is winning the argument. But I go back, and people just been interviewed by one of the radio interviewers, and he was asking me, if they made some slight changes to the constitutional treaty or the reform treaty, would it make any difference to me? I said, no. I said, the fact is we've been forced into these railway lines leading towards a centralised bureaucratic Europe a long time ago. And the key step, I thought, was the Single European Act in the 1980s, which, strangely, Margaret Thatcher allowed through. She was then surrounded by a cabal of Euro enthusiasts. There's Geoffrey Howe and Leon Britton and a few others, and they had her in their grip, and they got through the Single European Act. If that hadn't happened, none of this would have happened. And then a bit later on, of course, you've got John Major, and John Major is a Euro enthusiast, and they got through Maastricht. We opposed Maastricht, I might say, the Labour Party. I wasn't in Parliament at the time. We stringently opposed it, and a few Tories voted against, but they got it through by the skin of their teeth. So these big changes, I think we should have had referenda on those as well. If we'd had a referendum on the Single European Act, stating the direction, that would have been, I think, Maastricht was about the monetary union, essentially, about the single European currency, the European Bank, and so on. If we'd had a referendum, I suspect there'd have been no vote on that occasion. People want to cooperate with our European friends and comrades, but they don't want the European Union. And I think if they'd been told this is what it's about, they would have voted no. Yes, we'll be friends with our European colleagues, but no, we do not want Maastricht, and we do not want the Single European Act. And I think the same is true now. Even if we have a referendum, and the referendum it turns out to be a no vote, we go back to the status quo. But I don't think the status quo is acceptable. There are still too many powers with Europe, with the European Union, still too many powers held by the Commission, and I think we've got to step back and actually re-establish a lot more democratic control over the things that matter to us in our daily lives. It's very interesting that I've just been to Germany on a railway visit, and we met the head of German Railways, Deutsche Bahn, which is publicly owned, a splendid system, very lots of investment, and they have got buses which are integrated as public transport system. They've got road haulage vehicles all integrated into one big publicly owned system, and it's brilliant. But they're going to be forced to privatise it. And the big argument then is, well, if we're going to privatise it, with the sort of selling shares in the whole thing, but keep the integration together. But their problem is they're going to be forced by the European Commission to privatise it on the British model. The British model, where you smash things to smithereens, you separate the trains from the track, and then you sell off all the trains to different companies, and you have the chaos we've had in Britain. And I was there, and I said to the head of German Rails, I said, if you want maintenance costs to rise by 4 times, and new railway building to rise by 5 times, and you want safety to be worse, so sure, follow the European Union and privatise it on the British model. I said, but that's what you'll get. And they don't want it. I mean, they clearly aren't. It's interesting that the German trade unions are now starting to get so fed up with the Social Democrats who are in league with the Conservatives over there, that they are threatening to withdraw their support for the Social Democrats. So, pressure from the grassroots does matter, and that's what this meeting is about. It's pressure on our leaders from the grassroots, from parliamentarians. I know wherever I go, and I'll write in my local paper, say these views and put, do you want these things? And overwhelming support. There's hardly anybody who disagrees with this idea of having a choice. If at the end of the day people choose to vote for the Reform Treaty, reluctantly, I would have to accept that because it's a democratic decision. I don't suppose they would vote that way, but if they did, we would accept it. And I think, as and when we hand that referendum, our government should accept that decision and not adopt the Reform Treaty. We ought to build and start building again a democratic Europe, not a centralised, undemocratic, bureaucratic state of Europe. I'm a Democrat, a socialist, but I accept sometimes that I will lose votes but I want to lose votes honestly in a democratic parliament with the chance of changing government next time round. Once things are handed over to the European Union, the chances of changing policies will be gone. And I really do believe this, that one of the reasons why the European Union is seen to be so important to so many people is it will stop individual countries moving in political directions they do not like democratic socialism. And I speak as a democratic socialist. I want that right to be retained by our government, and I would like to see democratic socialists, and I've got many democratic socialist friends in Sweden and Holland and France and elsewhere, for them to have that choice as well. And if some countries choose to be conservative, others choose to be socialist, so be it. It's called democracy. Thank you.
Well done, Calvin. Thanks very much for a very powerful case to give. Let me just do a quick check. Calvin told us what would happen in a secret ballot of the PLP, in which leadership didn't get to know how we are brave people, how we were voting. Now the leadership knows nothing of this. It won't go outside. Can I just see, by a show of hands, all those who think there should not be a referendum on this constitution? 4. Okay. Who thinks there should be a referendum on this constitution? Thank you very much. Who couldn't give a bugger? Well, I think that shows the state of opinion, and I think that's reflected nationwide. The people think there should be a referendum. They want a referendum. I think the bulk of the party outside Parliament and Labour voters think there should be a referendum, and we promised them a referendum. We must have a referendum. Now it's over to you, with time before the Hall lease expires at 7 for a couple of questions. Any questions?
First of all, may I, not being a member of the Labour Party, commend you on the efforts of this society within the Labour Party. This is my question, although some of these points have been touched upon in the presentation that we've had so far. May I ask, what are the implications regarding the future of the British Labour Party in a Europe ruled by an undemocratic, supranational, centralist government in Brussels? Is there a future for the British Labour Party in that situation? And the question will apply equally, of course, to the other major political parties.
Well, I think there's always going to be a need for a Labour Party, and as long as it represents the views of the people of Britain. I think if we moved into that situation with a European state, it is possible, and it's been mentioned earlier, that we could unravel that in the longer term. But it would take a Herculean effort, I think, by the politicians of Britain to do that. But I think I would certainly want to keep alive the idea that we could re-democratise Europe and do it hopefully without conflict. We want to do it in a peaceful way. But I would like to think that even if we go to vote, we were driven into this undemocratic superstate, there would be sufficient resistance, not just in Britain but elsewhere, to fight for the re-establishment of democratic government at national level. And certainly I would continue to work in that way.
Yes.
There'll always be a scope for the Labour Party and Labour acting in defence of the people. The problem is how much power is surrendered. An increasing proportion of decisions are foisted on us from Europe. That's the problem. But remember that this party is about democracy. This party is about answerability to the people. A system in which a European elite foists on the people a constitution or regulations from Europe on which they haven't been consulted is not democracy, it's plutocracy. Yeah. It's rule by the elite without consulting the people. And that's exactly what we're against. So it's in the interest of the Labour Party to fight this. This is why, for instance, we were so strongly opposed to the euro and managed to keep the euro out of this country. The fight will go on, and the Labour Party, I hope, will be maintaining it. Now, another question. It was here. Yes.
Yeah, I'm Tony Richardson. I'm here from the Bakers Union, Bakers Allied Workers Union. Our policy is actually to favour a referendum. Last week at the TUC, there was a resolution passed, actually the RMT resolution, which I spoke on and supported, failed. That meant the TUC would actually campaign for a referendum. However, the policy of the TUC now is to ask for a referendum. Will there be links from this organisation, and are you hopeful for the leadership of the TUC to actually give you that help to force a referendum?
Yes, we are. We're very happy to see the change in the position of the TUC. It was all put down to Jacques Delors' visit to Brighton in 1987, when he really wooed the TUC and all of a sudden persuaded them that they could do better by going to Brussels than they could by trying to get action from a Conservative government in this country. I think there's been a recovery from that, and several unions are now taking a very different position in the light of experience. We would work with the TUC. Indeed, we'd welcome working with the TUC and support from the TUC, and we're strongly supported by individual unions now there.
I understand, Chair, that there's been 2 select committees that work on this, and I think that Kelvin is a member of one of them. I think one was told by the Under-Secretary Murphy in the recess, because it's a recess they actually met, that a detailed manifesto or mandate was agreed in Brussels as long ago as June by Tony Blair and Margaret Beckett before they resigned or went, and that this will be incorporated into the new treaty. But my other information is that the new treaty was only published in July. It's got 300 amendments to 300 clauses, and that will be what we're told is not a new constitution. I think that there's going to be, in fact, I read in the paper that there's going to be a select committee, another one, shortly after the House goes. Can they please look into this? And I think it may be that Kelvin could.
We're grateful for the information. I didn't know this. I wouldn't put it past any of them. Tony was very enthusiastic, naively so in a lot of ways. He wanted, to work with Europe, saw himself as a leader in Europe, and the published accounts by his economics advisor, Derek Scott, indicate how naive his views was. He didn't appreciate the realities. Yeah. And it might well be that in that enthusiasm he gave those commitments. I don't know. Certainly our hands won't be tied by them, nor will the hands of the party.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. A referendum was held this week in a small village in Dorset, and though we may mock it, what is not widely realised is that some 30–40% of the electorate of England and Wales are in a position, with the request of 10 of their voters, to call a similar referendum. If the government decides there will be no referendum, then at least with a campaign we are in a position to at least have the question put, but in front of 40% of the electorate. There are, just for reference, some very large communities that have town and parish councils. One, Chairman, you will be familiar with, just outside your constituency, Immingham. It's not a small village anymore, is it?
No.
No. There could be a referendum in Immingham at 4 weeks' notice. Yeah.
Well, thank you. I'm delighted to hear that, and it's something that clearly should be encouraged. I always say, being a religious northerner, that the South always gets the goodies, and in this case I don't see why Dorset alone should get the goodies that should be extended to the whole of the country. Thanks for the information. Now, there's a question here. Yep.
My name's Steve Hamilton. I'm a local from Bournemouth. I've listened very, very intently to all the speeches, and I've heard lots of good points you're saying about all these laws that have been foisted upon us from within this state and from within that state of Brussels. One point that a lot of people seem to miss here is this. Our Parliament has become infested with lawyers. Duplicitous, English twisting, rhetorical twisting, or I'll choose a nice word, not men who are professional dissemblers. You have professional dissemblers in the highest echelons in Brussels. We are all being duped and cajoled along by judicial vultures who, whilst they are in their legal status, get plenty of money. They think they are the new elite, like the elite who used to rule in communist Russia. It was a judicial state. And I'll tell you this, if you ignore the duplicity of lawyers, but I'm saying learn to start questioning lawyers. I've questioned some of the highest law lords in this country, and I've dismissed one of them as a non-legal. You've got to start dissembling the legal bullshit that is foisted upon us.
Okay, well, I mean, some of my best friends are lawyers.
I'm not a lawyer myself.
Let me begin by saying I'm not a lawyer. In fact, one sometimes wishes that Gordon's policy of deep cleaning every hospital could be applied to the lawyers in Parliament. I think there's certainly a case for that, but I think the problem is, I mean, the lawyers, certainly in the European Court, constantly rule against us. But the problem is really that this is a war of lies, actually. The truth is always distorted. We're always told that this change doesn't make much difference. This change is just to make us work more efficiently. This change doesn't abridge our national rights. Just go along with it. And stage by stage, by a salami process, we're dragged along behind. And each time the lies go on, each time there's a Council of Ministers or a European Council, Prime Ministers and Ministers come out and say we want everything. John Major, game, set and match. It's always a British victory. And each one speaks to the television and the media in their own country and says they won. They can't all have won, but the truth is never, the stories are never compared, and the lies are never caught out, and that's how Europe progresses.
Sorry,
if there were to be an election in October, very soon, this issue would become an election issue and would be coinciding with what was happening in Brussels at the time. What would the view of the panel be if this arises? Because you would then have a position where the Conservative Party was definitely unequivocally promising a referendum and the Labour Party wasn't. And you've all agreed that this is an issue which goes above politics and goes to the heart of democracy. Now in '75 there were quite a few Conservatives that voted Labour on the strength of the Labour government promising a referendum and the Conservatives resisting it. Yeah. This would be the other way round in this coming October election. Would the Labour Party take the same view that that in order to save democracy they would have to vote for the Conservatives Party that unequivocally promised a referendum?
Interesting question. Would it be an Enoch Powell situation in reverse? Well, my answer is I don't know. I would prefer, I'll give them right in front of Kelvin in a minute, I would prefer an October election, I have to say. The Labour Party's position in an October election would almost certainly be that it isn't finalised yet. We're still fighting for our red lines. We're still fighting for our rights. Let's wait and see. I don't think that's an honest position, but I think that's what it would be.
I think it would present a difficulty, I think, for the Labour leadership in an election campaign, which may or may not happen. But there was some statistics about 3 weeks ago, an opinion poll suggested that a significant proportion of Labour voters would, consider their votes if there was a referendum was rejected, and I don't know how strong that would be, but I think it was up to 20-25% of Labour voters would actually be unhappy about voting Labour if we were refusing a referendum. Now, that may or may not turn out to be the reality if we have an election. But I think it is an issue, and I think it's going to be a difficulty if they decide to go for election.
I agree with that. That's a very good question. I think it would be a factor, I hope it would be a factor pushing Gordon into saying yes to a referendum, personally. Yeah. Right at the back, you've been waiting.
Right, thanks. My name's Jim. I'm a local resident. I'm a little sad, actually, about the turnout here. We do have quite a sizable university in Bournemouth. I thought there'd be a few more students here, That sort of reflects my point, in a way. You rounded up by talking about the future of social democracy, that nation states could elect their Labour parties or whatever. What is basically the future of social democracy when our most successful Labour Prime Minister stands up and says that the ideological battles are dead, and our current Prime Minister cozies up to Thatcher?
Well, my answer would be that these things move in cycles and fashions. We were told with New Labour that social democracy, the tie to the trade unions, the instinct for egalitarianism, were all, and for public intervention and public ownership, public service, were all dead issues, and the tide flowed to cooperation with business and capital. The fashion will change and it will come back. Social democracy won't die. It'll reappear in a new situation, as new problems emerge. For instance, the collapse of Northern Rock shows the need for effective public management of that particular sector. It shows the need for early public intervention. So everything is in flux, but there is a basic core of social democratic belief, which I think will come back and will get stronger. Kelvin.
Francis Fukuyama, the philosopher, suggested that history was at an end because there'd be no more major social change. He's actually recanted in the last couple of years, I think, and he thinks it's not the end of history after all, and I think he's right.
Don't bury us yet. Yes, the last question.
Rod Smith, Research Officer, General Federation of Trade Unions. I'm also a Labour Party member, and I am proud that the Labour government, it was decided in 1975 eventually to have a referendum, and that was a Labour government in power. They reluctantly did have a referendum, and I think it was a great thing, and I think it was the first referendum we've ever had, I think, probably. But I do remember, though, the expenditure on each side of the referendum campaign was very unequal, and part of that was due to big business. Right? Okay. So, just could you go through what effect has big business had on this erosion of the idea of the nation state, which there seems to have been? How has big business operated? That's my first question. And secondly, how much time have we got to campaign for a referendum? And thirdly, what is the Eurosceptic committee recommend to do to get this referendum? What practical steps?
I mean, the inequality in the referendum campaign in 1975, I remember well. It was absolutely amazing and appalling. I mean, every corner shop had cemented into the ground these hoardings, metal hoardings, with bolted in Harold Wilson with his pipe saying "Vote Yes." We had, I was on the no side, and we had a very difficult time. But I think these matters, fairness is not to the forefront when it comes to referendums on European matters. But at the same time, I think so many people now are more aware of the issues. I think it would be, even with the kind of propaganda that they will have, I think they would be very difficult for them to win. And it's. I mean, if you look at countries like Sweden and Holland and France, where the whole establishment was saying yes, and the people voted no, I think that's. That people are learning, and they're not going to be conned.
Those of us who support a referendum have to accept the verdicts of referenda. I mean, I think we have to recognise they are essentially a conservative device, in the sense that referenda tend to affirm the status quo. Well, in 1975, of course, the status quo was membership of Europe. And when we had all that propaganda that Kelvin tells us about, I remember things being distributed on Blackpool, where I took my kids just before the referendum, saying the weather will be better, and showing pictures of bathing bells on some beach, which was presumably an English beach, warmed by the sun of Europe, and stark naked, it had to be added, semi-naked. You could understand why people were a bit baffled, but they were voting for the status quo. That, in a sense, closed the door on the argument for a long time. So we don't want to lose this one, and I'm sure we won't lose this one. But I'll just conclude by saying we're going to have to fight it, and we're going to have to maximise all the resources we can, because we will be facing the same imbalance of money. It won't be as serious this time because we've got a lot of business on our side, and not so much on our side, but on the Conservative side, putting money in behind a referendum. And then the press was pretty unanimously in favour of Europe, and now we've seen today's Sun as an indication that the press is now much more divided on the issue. But I'll conclude with my story. I once talked to Mary Wilson. She said she hated going to polling booths at election time because when she and Harold went in to vote, all the press were there, photographs, cameras, and they all went in smiling and waving. She said in the European referendum in '75, we both went in and we smiled and we waved to the press and they took lots of pictures. Harold voted yes, I voted no, and we came out as a united couple, smiling and waving. And I think you've given us a nice united audience tonight, and an affirmation that the bulk of this population and this party wants a referendum. Thank you very much for your attending. Thank you for our speakers.